The Art of Being Ruled. Wyndham Lewis. Original publication 1926. 1989 edition. Narrated by Skeptical Waves. Part 5. Natures and Puppets. Chapter 1. What the Puppets Want. Our problem is, no doubt, to perfect a larva, but not, as that statement suggests, the larva mankind, the whole of that dense abstraction. The system of breeding horses for speed is a far better one. That is no doubt the solution. But the slowness, sloth, and commonness of the stock of Homo stultus would still be there when the subspecies, or the superspecies, had been bred, though it would no longer be a matter of despairing concern to the Professor Richards of the future. There would be two species, there would be two worlds. There would not be the lively competition, I believe, for entrance to the upper world, and its rigors, that you might suppose. On the contrary, the underworld, the relaxed and animal one of L'Homme sans Swell, would be the favorite, probably. Today there are, in fact, two species and two worlds, which incessantly interfere with each other, checkmate each other, are eternally at cross purposes. They speak the same language, in that they answer to Professor Richet's ideal of the universal tongue, but they do not understand each other. Goethe had a jargon of his own for referring to these two species whose existence he perfectly recognized. He divided people into puppets and natures. He said the majority of people were machines, playing a part. When he wished to express admiration for a man, he would say about him, he is a nature. This division into natural men and mechanical men, which Goethe's idiom amounts to, answers to the solution advocated in this essay. And today there is an absurd war between the puppets and the natures, the machines and the men. And owing to the development of machinery, the pressure on the natures increases. We are all slipping back into machinery, because we all have tried to be free. And what is absurd about this situation is that so few people even desire to be free in reality. The ideal of obedience conceived by the Jesuits, so that, in their words, a member of their order should regard himself as a corpse, to be moved here or there at the absolute discretion of the superior, has often been described as an inhuman one. But is it inhuman? For is it not what most people desire, to be dolls of that sort, to be looked after, disciplined into insensitiveness, spared from suffering by insensibility and blind dependence on a will superior to their own? The more accentuated the complexity of forms or functions becomes, the more startling the inequality, Professor Richet remarks in his chapter on inequality. If two pebbles are always dissimilar, how much more two leaves, and, with still more cause, two ants? How will it be in the case of two men? To accept and to organize these differences is the solution of ills of which Professor Richet speaks. And Professor Richet's classification would no doubt serve. A moment's reflection will convince us that men can only be classified according to their merits. On the one hand, those who are industrious, upright, brave, and intelligent; on the other, those who are lazy, dishonest, cowardly, and stupid. That would of course not be the way to put it, for the lazy, stupid, and dishonest cowards would show themselves both industrious and brave, perhaps, in opposing this settlement. A popular book of gossipy predictions that has recently appeared, called The Future, will provide us with a few further pictures of mankind from the point of view of science. Its author, Professor Lowe, has the necessary scholastic quarterings, FCS, FRCS, etc., and is a member of the Council of Patentees. His heart is in a different place to Professor Richet's. In the future, he says, boxers, footballers, and others who rely mainly upon their strength for a living will be regarded as throwouts of low mental capacity. Money can today be guaranteed for a concourse of athletes, but not for the maintenance of a hospital. In the future men will be more sensible. The optimism of this writer about the future is at times a little oppressive, he goes into so much detail. But his scorn of the present mankind leaves nothing to be desired. Imagine a really intelligent, thoughtful man, and future education will make men thoughtful, kicking a ball about on a field for a living. At present one of the most popular alleged amusements is dancing. When considering this, it can only be agreed that it is fortunate that the planet to which people are confined by ignorance does not contain any beings of high mentality. Imagine a really intelligent person, one who had solved the electrical problems of life, who really understood planetary movement and the actual appearance of babies into the world, suddenly entering a hot, smelly room where a nigger band shrieked and groaned the latest jazz tunes to a crowd of dancers of all ages, and in all stages of intoxication, the soulless gaiety perhaps being enhanced by paper carnival hats. They would be regarded as interesting specimens, like performing mice, and efforts would be made to explain the phenomenon. Hysteria result of peculiar breeding, local anesthesia, very sad. Thus this young professor, as Descartes strolled among the inhabitants of Amsterdam as though they had been the trees of a wood, so this contemporary representative of advanced thought regards his kind, surprised at one of their characteristic occupations as performing mice. Human life appears to depend to a large extent on some superimposed rhythm. People are like leaves agitated by the breeze. When the wind stops, the leaf falls into rest, but does not appear to alter. The heart, lungs, eyes, and feeding intervals are all periodic happenings or modulations of some function of time. So dancing can be a great relief, a dope. But this popular scientific view of the moment could be extended to everything. Indeed, science is extending it, in the sense that many psychologists of the tester type recommend orchestras in factories. It is certain, I think, that by far the greater part of people ask nothing better than to be performing mice. And, as has already been said, they do not mind having their tails cut off by a Dr. Weissman, as Mr. Shaw thinks they do. Plato, ridiculing the mystery poets and the Phaedrus, says, "What better recompense can they give to virtue than an eternity of intoxication?" But an eternity of intoxication is what the performing mice, or, if you prefer Goethe's word, the puppets, want. When Plutarch's wife is mourning the death of her daughter, he recommends her to go and get consolation from the Dionysia. That was the advice of a kind and excellent husband. The philosopher who does not require this rhythm, recommending his own diet, the ecstasy obtained in the recollection of that which he has seen in a former existence with God, is unreasonable enough. Is that sensible advice to give to a performing mouse? The tone of studied contempt on the one hand, or despairing abuse on the other, for Homo sapiens, is unmerited probably. It is a mistake arising from the democratic standards from which the subject is approached. There is nothing contemptible about an intoxicated man, if it is nothing more than a bookful of words or a roomful of notes that he has got drunk on. A dancing mouse, the little favorite of Mr. Yerkes, performs its function and keeps Mr. Yerkes amused. A corpse is even not a contemptible thing. There's a good deal to be said for being dead, etc. It is the tone of indignation or of pedagogic displeasure that is the fault with the attitude of science towards man. Either rage, disgust, misanthropy, or the scorn of a public examiner is displayed. The attitude should surely be more truly scientific than that to give promise of effectiveness. There should be no unkindness or disgust. But all these tones are adopted by a certain class of men who from no point of view have very much right to them. The differentiation of mankind into two rigorously separated worlds would not be on the old class lines at all, to begin with. It would be like a deep racial difference, not a superficial class difference. This would entirely remove the sting of inferiority and the usual causes of complaint. A beaver does not compare itself with a walrus or an antelope. There is no upper and lower between a cat and a dog. So it would be with the new species of man. Under the aristocratic or feudal regime there were two worlds of thought, with amusements and so on adapted to the training and habits of these two communities living side by side. The arrangements were at no time perfect, they were always on a social rather than an intellectual basis, the small world of the European upper class being merely a better washed, and scented, powdered, and laced, replica of the animal standard from which it had merely snobbishly removed itself. There still were certain banalities from which this segregation protected the fortunate few. This aristocratic separation of classes on the old bad model was wounding to the susceptibilities of those who were not fortunate enough, as they thought, to be born into this select and brilliant world. This was because the separation was artificial, in the sense that it reposed on the heredity principle and accident, that it was conducted and upheld, naturally, in an insolent and unintelligent spirit, and because it too plainly reproduced, in a sumptuous form, the less fortunate state, the third estate, with which it was contrasted. This top dog did all the things, with an ostentatious relish, that the poor, envious underdog, squinting jealously at him from his kennel, would like to do. The aristocrat pretended to be of another clay to the proletarian, but the proletarian knew better. He knew that he was exactly of the same clay as himself. There was no spiritual or intellectual chasm, only a rather dirty little social ditch. Now, instead of a separation in which a small group of people gets the upper hand, the power separates itself, builds a fence round itself, and proceeds to do with an extreme monotony, and usually without much taste or intelligence, all the animally pleasant things that all those left out in the cold, down in the basement or out in the slums, would like to do. Let us imagine a separation not the result of a skin-deep power, or of social advantage, but something like a biological separating out of the chaff from the grain. Or to put it in another way, if, of two men, one wishes to go and play cricket, and the other wishes to go to a shed in his garden, where he has fitted up a small laboratory, and spend the day in research, neither one envies the other, they both recognize that nature has turned them out so differently that what amuses the one does not amuse the other. It takes all sorts to make a world, they would no doubt both remark, if discussing it, all would be well, and harmony would reign between them. If, on the other hand, there were two men, both of whom were passionately fond of cricket. If one, by cheating the other in business, or by arming himself and robbing the other, became extremely wealthy, and then proceeded to lay out a beautiful cricket ground, to have golden stumps manufactured, a lovely bat with a big diamond on the top, and laced pads, and left a hole in the fence so that the poor man, at whose expense all this luxury was built up, could peer at him playing the favorite game of both, not especially well, perhaps, then we can at once understand that a great deal of animosity must result. Such a separation as would be obtained by an examination system instead of heredity, perhaps, or such a separation as the instinctive growth and differentiation of another type of man, heredity serving a biologic and not a social end, that is one solution of the present difficulty. There would be no stigma attached to a devotional adherence to the routine of the animal life. L'homme bien sensuel would cheerfully, or cheerily, confess that all highbrow matters he had from the cradle disliked, and would disappear round the corner to the local bridge club with cheery words on his honest lips, ejaculating contentedly, "It takes all sorts to make a world." And angry professors would not be allowed to call him Homo stultus. He, as much as the more creative type of person, would be Homo sapiens. It would be the professor who would be convicted of stupidity then, if he called stultus after this well-satisfied, good-natured, unambitious man. It is not by any means as an aspirant for the highest biologic honors that I am writing. But the scorn of the man of science and the rage of the philosopher have to be met. They cannot much longer be neglected, or resisted, rather, for they are now an integral part of the great system of what the public wants. As they originally appear in the speculative brain or superbly trained eye, they must be allowed some foundation in the common observation of all of us. Although personally unambitious, I am not indifferent to the interests I serve. It is in that spirit that I set out to consider how what the puppets want might differ from what the public wants, and to see if the growing hatred and contempt could not be lifted a little from these very ticklish relations. The threatening attitude of Mr. Shaw and Mr. Russell to the Yahoo tallies too much, I thought, with the suave malignity of the publicist. Another way of regarding it would be this. The ferocious misanthropy of the adepts of what the public wants is a very compromising thing for the intelligence to be associated with. The puppets Ozymandias and Semiramis, as conceived by Mr. Shaw, have to be destroyed. But those puppets are a libel on the public, or they would be if it were intended to identify them, and that seems Mr. Shaw's intention. In reality they are another genus of puppets, a genus of homicidal puppets, sure enough. And they bear a strange resemblance to the misanthropic masters of the doctrine of what the public wants.